Tsar Nicholas II and his wife Alexandra were coronated as Emperor and Empress of Imperial Russia on the 14th of May, 1896. 4 days later, a parade was to be held at Khodynka Field. Khodynka Field was a popular site for races, military parades, and fairs, and at the time of the coronation housed an army of Russian soldiers. Traditionally, the days following a coronation were supposed to belong to the people, and the new Tsar was determined that the fete would have unprecedented attendance, entertainment, and generosity. It was to symbolize a prosperous future under the newly crowned emperor, and gifts were to be distributed to the people. On the evening before the parade, on the 17th of May, Russian citizens began flocking to the field from all across Moscow, and by the early morning of the 18th, there were over 500,000 people waiting for the festivities to begin. The initial mood of the people and the festive atmosphere had changed, with many losing consciousness from a lack of air and exhaustion from a lack of food or a long travel to Khodynka. When rumors that the gifts were being distributed began to spread, and that there would be an insufficient amount to give to all the people, the attendees began to rush forward. People pushed against the barriers, with those directly at the front being crushed against them. When the barriers were eventually toppled by the sheer force of the crowd, those at the front were trampled under the heavy feet of the people behind, and many were killed. Khodynka Field was also covered in ditches and holes that became filled with the bodies of the dead and dying people. The crushing continued for 10 minutes, with police and army personnel looking on helplessly at the carnage and slaughter occurring before their eyes. The Russian correspondent for the London Times wrote that no such holocaust of human victims has ever before been caused by a crowd in the open air, and probably no such ghastly disfigurement of the dead has ever been seen on any modern battlefield. I was present on many of the battlefields around Plevna and cannot remember having seen anything so horrible. After the stampede had stopped, an estimated 1,389 people had died. Police and firemen at the scene worked for several days to extricate the dead and dying people. Red Cross vans, fire brigade carts, and even furniture vans were used to transport the bodies first to the hospital and eventually to Vagenkov Cemetery. 80% of the people on the field returned to locate missing loved ones, with the remainder still waiting for the arrival of the Tsar. When the Tsar eventually appeared at 2 p.m. on the 18th, the crowd greeted him with loud cheering and music, before the imperial suite returned to Petrovsky Palace 15 minutes later. Some witnesses reported that a lot of the enthusiasm from the crowd was artificial, with pseudo-folk being assembled around the pavilion to bow and cheer, whilst others raised their hands and pointed towards the massive bodies trying to get the Tsar's attention, but were ignored. Following the processions, many writers and reporters sought answers as to who was responsible. While the general opinion in Moscow and the West was that the victims were to blame, others, such as Aylmer Maude, blamed it on the people's alienation by Russian society. Maude argued that the people had worked extremely hard and witnessed the value generated by their labor being spent on lavish palaces, and were anxious to secure something tangible for themselves in return. Members of the Russian intelligentsia blamed the autocratic regime itself, stating that the authorities had poorly prepared for the festivities. A similar incident occurred during the coronation of Alexander III, the previous Tsar, in 1883, where 32 people were killed in a stampede at the same field. A special commission for the arrangement of the coronation popular spectacles and festivities was formed in March 1895 to create a timetable of coronation activities. Although it was noted that the ground of the field was irregular, no plans were made to rectify it, and no one had bothered to personally examine the fairgrounds. The best indication of poor organization on the part of the Russian authorities was the severe lack of a police and military presence to control the crowd, along with the absurd arrangement of stalls. There was also a lack of medical personnel and equipment, which led to many people dying of treatable wounds following the stampede. Captain Lvovich, commanding 12 Cossacks, 2 police constables, and 46 soldiers, reported that crowd numbers greatly exceeded expectations and he required reinforcements. Several other officers sent similar telegrams requesting help. Adequate reinforcements would not arrive. The Khodynka tragedy called into question the wisdom of Tsar Nicholas II's ministerial appointments. specifically Grand Duke Sergei, the Governor-General of Moscow, who was nicknamed the Prince of Khodynka, and his continued presence in the Tsar's cabinet, despite his apparent incompetence, would create many new anti-monarchists. Furthermore, both Nicholas and his wife would later attend the festive Montebello ball at the French embassy the night of the tragedy on the 18th of May, instead of suspending further festivities. While bodies were being loaded on wagons, the Tsar and Empress were drinking champagne, eating luxurious food, and dancing with other aristocrats and diplomats. Although the Tsar himself was likely appalled at the loss of life at Khodynka, the tone-deaf response of the Russian authorities caused great indignation towards the Tsar early on in his reign. Even though Nicholas and Alexandra would attend hospitalized victims the day after the tragedy, it received little public attention. The tragedy at Khodynka, in hindsight, would seemingly foreshadow the rest of Nicholas's reign, with disaster after disaster unfolding over the next decade, from the Russo-Japanese War to Bloody Sunday to World War I, and eventually the collapse of the Romanov dynasty and the Russian Revolution in 1917. The tragedy at Khodynka made many Russians aware of the apathy that these aristocrats and monarchs felt towards the lower classes of Russian society, building resentment that would eventually boil over into a full-blown revolution. Thanks for watching.